They laughed when they saw me behind the counter, wearing a cheap gas station vest. My own kids, Leo in his shiny convertible, Jessica hiding her face like I was a stranger. They treated me like an embarrassment, not a father. I pumped their gas while they laughed, then drove off without a word. That was the moment I stopped crying and started planning. Months later, when I bought the entire gas station chain they used to mock, they didn't laugh. They couldn't. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. The sleek black convertible slid up to pump number 3 with the predatory silence of a shark. It was a graduation gift I was never consulted on, paid for by my ex-wife. My son, Leo, sat behind the wheel, his expensive sunglasses hiding his eyes, but not the arrogant tilt of his head. In the passenger seat, my daughter, Jessica, was absorbed in her phone, her thumb flicking across the glass screen. For a foolish, hopeful second, my heart jumped. Maybe they had stopped by to see me, a surprise visit to brighten a long shift. I forced my best customer service smile, wiped my greasy hands on a rag, and smoothed down the cheap, stiff polyester of my Roadstar Gas and Go vest. The fluorescent lights of the station canopy cast a sickly yellow glow, making everything feel cheap and desperate. "Hey guys, what a surprise," I said, my voice sounding unnaturally cheerful even to my own ears. Jessica's head snapped up. Her eyes, the same shade of blue as her mother's, widened. But it wasn't with the warmth of recognition. It was with the cold, abject horror of a teenager caught in a deeply embarrassing situation. She immediately yanked her phone up to her face, a flimsy shield, and hissed at her brother, her voice a stage whisper designed to be heard. "Oh my God, Leo, just drive! Go!" Leo didn't drive. He did something far crueler. He turned his head slowly, smirking, and looked directly past me, as if I were a ghost or a piece of machinery. He raised his voice and, speaking to the empty air just over my shoulder, commanded, "Fill it up with premium, please." The words hung in the humid evening air. Please. A courtesy he extended to a stranger, a word he deliberately denied his own father. I stood there, frozen for a heartbeat, the heavy gas nozzle suddenly feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. In the back seat, 2 of their friends, kids I used to coach in Little League, were snickering into their hands. There was no choice. I was at work. So, with my dignity shredding around my feet like confetti, I uncapped the tank and pumped the gas in a state of absolute ringing silence. The rhythmic thump-thump of the pump was the only sound. Leo paid with a tap of his mother's credit card, never once allowing his days to meet mine. As the convertible's engine purred back to life and the car peeled out of the station, Jessica's clear, cutting laugh floated back to me. It wasn't a sound of joy. It was a sound of relief. Relief at having escaped the mortifying sight of her own father. The pain that followed was sharp, but it was quickly replaced by something else, something unexpected. A sudden, ice-cold clarity washed over me, a terrifying calm that settled deep in my bones. They didn't see a father. They saw a problem, an embarrassing footnote in their perfect, curated lives. And in that moment, under the buzzing, yellow lights of the gas station, I, Elias, was finally, irrevocably done playing my part. That night, I didn't cry. Tears felt like a luxury I could no longer afford. I walked into my tiny, rented apartment, a place that always smelled of stale coffee and the quiet desperation of starting over, and I moved with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. I ignored the stack of bills on the counter and the loneliness that usually settled on my shoulders like a heavy coat. Instead, I went straight to my bedroom closet. Tucked away at the very back, behind a row of sensible, second-hand clothes, was a heavy, dust-covered Pelican case. It was military-grade, waterproof and crush-proof, a relic from a lifetime ago. I knelt and wiped the dust from the keypad with my thumb before keying in a long, memorized code. There was a soft, electronic beep, and the vacuum-sealed blocks hissed open. The contents would have baffled anyone who knew me as I was now. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, there was no old fishing gear or sentimental photo albums from my marriage. There was a set of 3 encrypted military-grade hard drives, a compact satellite phone, and a single 8x10 photograph in a simple silver frame. The photo was of me, a decade younger. My hair was shorter, my jaw was clean-shaven, and I was wearing a tailored power suit that probably cost more than my apartment security deposit. I was standing on a brightly lit stage, my hand outstretched, shaking the hand of a famous titan of industry. The caption on the plaque I was holding was just visible: Business Strategist of the Year. This was the person I used to be, before I gave it all up, before I married Isabel and stepped back from my career to be the primary parent so she could build her empire. I was one of the most sought-after corporate turnaround specialists in the country. My field was brutal, specializing in hostile takeovers and the surgical restructuring of failing mega-corporations. I operated in the shadows, through shell companies and intermediaries. On Wall Street, they didn't know my real name. They knew me only by my professional pseudonym, The Ghost. I was the one they called when a company needed to be saved, or more often, quietly and profitably dismantled. I had been a phantom, a whisper, a legend. And tonight, the ghost was coming back.
I took one of the hard drives and my laptop to the small kitchen table. The moment I plugged it in and entered the decryption key, the screen lit up not with family photos, but with a world I had intentionally left behind. It was a dizzying array of complex market analyses, predictive financial models, and secure communication channels. My fingers, so used to handling a gas nozzle and a cash register, moved across the keyboard with an old, familiar fluency. It felt like coming home. My secret arsenal wasn't just data, it was connections. I picked up the satellite phone, its weight a comforting reassurance in my hand, and dialed a single encrypted number. It rang twice before a calm, gravelly voice answered. I was wondering when you'd call, Ghost. It was Julian, my former mentor, and one of the few people on Earth who knew my real identity. He was a quiet predator on Wall Street, a man whose placid demeanor hid a mind of razor-sharp brilliance. We hadn't spoken in 10 years, not since the day I told him I was stepping back to raise my family. He had warned me then, in his gentle way, that a mind like mine doesn't ever truly retire, it just lies dormant. "It's been a while, Julian," I said, my voice steady. "Dormancy is good for the soul, rust is not," he replied, skipping the pleasantries. "What's the hunt?" I didn't waste his time with the story of my children's cruelty or the humiliation of my divorce. He didn't need the emotional context. He only ever needed the target. "I need a complete financial workup on Apex Holdings," I said. "Everything you can find. Debt structure, pending acquisitions, internal vulnerabilities. I want to know where the termites are." There was a short pause on the line. "Apex," Julian mused. "Isabel's new playground. Ambitious, aggressive, sloppy." "Exactly," I said. And then I gave him the second piece of the puzzle, the one that made the entire strategy click into place. Their #1 acquisition target right now is the Roadstar Gas & Go franchise. Julian was silent for a moment longer, processing the beautiful, terrible symmetry of it all. The genius of my plan wasn't just in its complexity, but in its simplicity. My demeaning minimum-wage job wasn't a random act of post-divorce survival. I had taken it for a reason. It was a calculated beachhead. I had deliberately placed myself on the front lines, inside the very company my ex-wife was trying to conquer. She thought she had banished me to the lowest rung of the ladder. She had no idea I was about to saw it off from the bottom. My days at the gas station were transformed. I was no longer just a cashier waiting for the clock to run out. I was a deep cover operative on a reconnaissance mission. My mind, once dulled by the repetitive beep of the scanner, was now sharp, analytical, cataloging every inefficiency. I saw the lazy supply chain that led to wasted inventory, the outdated point-of-sale system that was vulnerable to skimming, and the profound, bone-deep demoralization of the employees. My direct manager was a man named Frank, a beaten-down, middle-aged man whose ambition had evaporated years ago, leaving behind a residue of resentment. He saw me as a harmless older man, a sympathetic ear for his endless stream of complaints about corporate neglect. He had no idea he was speaking to his new boss. "They don't listen," he'd grumble while leaning against the counter, gesturing vaguely toward the ceiling as if corporate lived in the clouds. "I send in the reports, the numbers are soft, customer traffic is down. They don't care, they just want the franchise fees paid on time." I would nod, making comforting sounds, all while my mind was cross-referencing his complaints with the financial data Julian had sent me. Frank was right, the numbers were soft, but they were too soft. There was a discrepancy between the reported sales and the actual cash deposits that couldn't be explained by a simple downturn in business. There was a leak somewhere. My discovery came by accident. One afternoon, Frank was complaining about a recent bad investment and how he needed to make it back quick. Later that day, while I was taking out the trash, a small folded piece of paper fell out of the bin. It was a betting slip from an off-track horse race. The amount wagered was significant, far more than a gas station manager's salary could justify. Suddenly, it all clicked into place. I started watching him more closely. I observed how he handled the cash drops at the end of the night, how he would recount the money in the back office, away from the cameras. I noticed the tiny, consistent voids he would create in the transaction logs, a customer refund here, a drive-off there. It was a classic small-time skimming operation. Frank wasn't just an incompetent manager, he was a thief, actively cooking the books to pay off his gambling debts. He thought he was confessing to a simple old man he could easily fool. He had no idea he was confessing his crimes to the prosecution, judge, and jury.
Revenge, I have always believed, is a dish best served legally, with a clear and undeniable paper trail. The following Tuesday, my day off, I went to a public library across town. Using one of their computers, I created a new, untraceable email address, a simple, anonymous handle. Then, I began to build my weapon. It wasn't just an accusation, it was an airtight case. I compiled everything, a detailed ledger of the discrepancies between the register tapes and the bank deposits over the past 6 months, cross-referenced with the dates of Frank's known gambling losses. I included scans of the inventory reports he had doctored, and even a photograph of the betting slip I had found in the public trash bin. It was a methodical, irrefutable deconstruction of his entire scheme. I wrote a short, professional cover letter, posing as a concerned employee who wished to remain anonymous, and sent the entire devastating file to 2 recipients: the entire corporate board of Roadstar and the enforcement division of the SEC. Then, I logged off, walked out of the library, and went grocery shopping. The fallout was faster and more dramatic than I could have hoped. The very next day, 2 stern-looking auditors in sharp, humorless suits walked into the gas station. They didn't speak to anyone. They went straight to the back office. 20 minutes later, they emerged with Frank, whose face was the color of ash. He was carrying a small cardboard box with his personal effects.
He didn't look at me as they escorted him out to their car. He didn't look at anyone. That evening, my phone buzzed. It was a number I hadn't seen in months. My ex-wife, Isabel. I let it ring 3 times before answering, my voice intentionally weary. "Hello? What the hell is going on at that dump you work at?" she barked, dispensing with any greeting. Her voice was a tight knot of fury. "My deal was on the 1-yard line, and now the entire Roadstar board is spooked. An SEC inquiry? Are you kidding me? Your little stunt just complicated my acquisition." She knew about the fraud investigation, of course. Her people at Apex would have flagged it immediately. The delicious irony was that she was yelling at the one person responsible for it, and she had absolutely no idea. She thought it was my stunt simply because I was physically present. I feigned ignorance, my voice trembling slightly for effect. I don't know what you're talking about. They just came and took my manager away. It was scary. Useless, she muttered, and hung up. I smiled. The first chess piece had been successfully removed from the board, and the queen had no idea she was even playing a game. Isabel panicked that her multi-million-dollar acquisition was about to implode. She did exactly what I predicted a woman like her would do. She used her children as tools. Believing the fraud investigation was a random event that had merely created a temporary obstacle, she tasked Leo and Jessica with a new mission: to keep an eye on the situation and report back to her. She wanted ground-level intelligence, and she was arrogant enough to believe her own children were capable of providing it. Their visits to the gas station became a regular, if excruciatingly awkward, occurrence. They would pull up, not in the flashy convertible, but in Jessica's more modest SUV, and come inside under the pretense of buying a soda or a bag of chips. They would loiter near the counter, feigning a sudden, uncharacteristic interest in my well-being. "So, things seem pretty crazy here, Dad," Leo would start, trying to sound casual. "Did the new manager say anything about the sale? About Apex?" "We're just worried, that's all," Jessica would add, her eyes darting around the store trying to gauge the atmosphere. "Mom says this deal is really important for our family's future." They were terrible spies. Their questions were clumsy, their motives transparent. They thought they were manipulating their poor, simple-minded father. They had no idea they were walking directly into my web. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I knew exactly what Isabel needed to hear to make her second-guess her strategy, and I used her own children as my messengers. I fed them carefully selected, beautifully packaged misinformation. "Oh, it's a mess," I'd sigh, wiping down the counter with a weary hand. "The new regional manager came by. She said the fraud was much deeper than they thought. Apparently, it's in a dozen stores in this district." This was a lie. Frank was a lone, desperate amateur. "She said corporate is thinking of just breaking up the franchise and selling it off piece by piece. They think a single buyer like Apex might be getting a bad deal. The whole company might be rotten." This was a fabrication designed to devalue the asset in Isabel's eyes. I watched them absorb every word, their faces a mixture of concern and self-importance. They would leave, and I knew, immediately call their mother, breathlessly reporting the insider information they had gathered. Julian and I could practically track the ripple effects in real time. Apex's lawyers would file for extensions. Isabel would demand new rounds of due diligence. She was a shark who smelled blood in the water, not realizing it was her own. My children, my unwitting spies, were meticulously helping me sabotage their own mother's deal, one bottle of soda at a time. While Isabel was chasing the ghosts I had created, Julian and I were making our real move. It was a classic ghost maneuver. Never attack head-on when you can simply buy the ground out from under your opponent's feet. The plan was not to try and outbid Apex Holdings for Roadstar. A bidding war would be costly, public, and unpredictable. My strategy was more elegant, more silent, and infinitely more lethal. During one of our encrypted late-night calls, Julian confirmed the next phase was in motion. Phoenix Legacy Group is officially incorporated, he said, his voice holding a note of quiet satisfaction. Phoenix Legacy Group was our shell corporation. It had no office, no employees, and a name that was deliberately poetic. It was a phantom entity with one singular purpose. While Isabel and her team were focused on the messy business of acquiring the company itself, Phoenix Legacy Group was executing a far more subtle takeover. We were buying Roadstar's debt. Like many large, struggling franchises, Roadstar was heavily leveraged. They owed millions to a variety of creditors, banks, investment funds, and private lenders. Due to the news of the fraud investigation, which I had so kindly leaked, and the company's perceived instability, which my children were so diligently confirming to their mother, the value of that debt had plummeted. Lenders were getting nervous, eager to offload the risk at a fraction of its face value. Phoenix Legacy Group, funded by a silent, untraceable trust I had established years ago, began quietly buying it all up. $1 million here, $5 million there. We bought it from a regional bank in Ohio, a hedge fund in Delaware, a private lender in Texas. None of them knew who the buyer was, only that they were getting a decent price for what was becoming a toxic asset. Within 3 weeks, it was done. Julian confirmed it. Phoenix Legacy Group, our ghost company, now held over 60% of Roadstar's total outstanding debt. The beauty of the strategy was in its absolute power. We didn't need to negotiate with the Roadstar board. We didn't need to enter a bidding war with my ex-wife. We had, for all intents and purposes, become the bank. We owned the mortgage on the entire company. And with that control came certain contractual rights, or covenants, buried deep in the fine print of the original loan agreements. Covenants that gave the primary debt holder veto power over any major corporate decisions. Decisions like, for instance, the sale of the company. Isabel was still fighting to buy the front door, oblivious to the fact that I had just purchased the entire building and already changed the locks. Convinced she was a master of corporate espionage and buoyed by her mother's praise for her insider information, Jessica decided it was time to leverage her position. She saw my worn-out work shoes, my tired face under the fluorescent lights, and the cheap polyester vest and felt a surge of what she probably mistook for pity. It was, in reality, a calculated condescension. She and Leo invited me to dinner, not to a local diner, but to a ridiculously expensive downtown restaurant where the waiters wore tuxedos and the water glasses were perpetually full. It was an ambush dressed in fine linen. The dinner conversation was a strained performance of filial concern. They asked about my apartment, my health, how I was really holding up. It was all a preamble to the main event. After the main course was cleared, Jessica exchanged a look with Leo. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a crisp, folded document, sliding it across the pristine white tablecloth. It was a legal agreement, drafted by Isabel's army of lawyers. My eyes scanned the dense jargon. It was a quitclaim deed. They were asking me to sign over my small remaining share of the equity from our old family home, the only asset my divorce lawyer had managed to secure for me. "Mom needs this to finalize her big deal," Leo said, his voice smooth and rehearsed. He leaned forward, attempting a look of earnest sincerity. "It's a collateral thing, just a formality. Signing this is the only way to secure our family's future." Our family. The word twisted in my gut. They stood to inherit millions from their mother, and here they were in a restaurant where one meal cost more than my weekly paycheck, asking me to give up the last few $1,000s I had to my name to the woman who had taken everything else. The emotional gut punch was breathtaking in its audacity. They weren't offering to help me. They weren't concerned about my future. They were asking me, in what they perceived as my moment of ultimate weakness and destitution, to sacrifice the last thing I had left to the woman who had taken everything else. They were trying to extract the gold from my teeth before burying the body. I looked at their faces, so full of youthful, arrogant certainty. They truly believed they were doing the right thing, that my small piece of their grand puzzle was a justifiable sacrifice. They saw me not as their father, but as a minor logistical problem to be solved. And in their profound, breathtaking selfishness, they handed me the perfect weapon. I looked down at the legal document on the table, then back up at the expectant faces of my children. A wave of ice-cold fury washed through me, but I didn't let a trace of it show. Instead, I let my shoulders slump. I summoned the image of the tired, beaten-down man they believed me to be. I let a flicker of what they would interpret as confused resignation cross my face. "Okay," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "If it's for the family, okay, I'll sign." The relief that washed over their faces was immediate and sickeningly profound. Jessica's condescendingly sympathetic smile returned. Leo leaned back in his chair, a smug look of victory spreading across his face. They had done it. They had convinced their pathetic father to do the right thing. "That's great, Dad. Really," Jessica said, patting my hand. "Mom will be so relieved. Her lawyers can have everything ready for tomorrow morning. We can all meet at her office at 10. "Perfect," I said, giving them a weak, tired smile of my own. 10 o'clock. They saw it as their final victory, the last loose end tied up. They had no idea they had just personally set the trigger on the trap I had been building for weeks. As they dropped me off at my apartment, lecturing me about the importance of being on time, my satellite phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a single encrypted text from Julian. "Debt secured. Covenants active. The veto is yours." The timing was exquisite. It was a symphony of destruction, and the final crescendo was about to begin. The next morning, Isabel would walk into that meeting believing she was about to close her deal and secure her legacy. She would believe her children had successfully manipulated their father into surrendering his last asset. She would be sitting there, confident and triumphant, completely unaware that overnight, Phoenix Legacy Group, my ghost company, had become the primary debt holder of her prize, and that with a single, silent, electronic vote, I had already exercised my right to veto the sale. The entire acquisition was frozen solid. The trap wasn't about to be sprung. It had already closed. They just hadn't heard the snap yet. The next morning, I walked into the glass and steel offices of Apex Holdings. The boardroom was on the top floor, a cathedral of corporate power with a panoramic view of the city I once called my own. Isabel was already there, standing at the head of a massive mahogany table, looking smug and triumphant. My children, Leo and Jessica, stood behind her like loyal lieutenants, their faces glowing with pride. They had delivered. Isabel gestured magnanimously to a chair opposite her. "Elias, glad you decided to be sensible about this," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. She slid the quit-claim deed and a pen across the polished table. "Just sign here and we can all move on with our lives." I looked at the pen. I looked at the document that would surrender the last piece of my old life. Then I looked up, past my children, and met my ex-wife's gaze. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the silent room with the force of a grenade. Isabel's smile faltered. "What did you say?" "I said no, I'm not signing," I repeated, my voice calm and clear. "Don't be ridiculous," she snapped, her composure cracking. "We had an agreement. My children—" At that exact moment, her lawyer, a man with a perpetually worried expression, looked down at his phone as it buzzed. He read the email that had just arrived. The color drained from his face. He went white as a sheet. "Isabel," the lawyer stammered, his eyes wide open with disbelief. "Isabel, there's a problem with the Roadstar deal. A major problem." "What problem?" she demanded, annoyed at the interruption. "Their primary creditor," the lawyer said, his voice shaking slightly. "They've just exercised a covenant veto. The sale is frozen. Indefinitely. It's been vetoed." Isabel stared at him, her mind unable to process the words. "What creditor? Who the hell has that much of their debt?" she sputtered, turning to her team. "Who is Phoenix Legacy Group?" The room was filled with a frantic, confused silence. I stood up slowly, the worn fabric of my second-hand coat a stark contrast to their expensive suits. I looked at Leo and Jessica, whose proud smiles had been replaced with masks of utter confusion. "He's right," I said, my voice ringing with a power they had never heard before. "There is a problem with the deal." I paused, letting the moment hang in the air before delivering the final, devastating blow. I should know. It was my company that vetoed it. Isabel swiveled her head to look at me, her face a grotesque mixture of rage and befuddlement. "What are you talking about? Phoenix Legacy Group?" I allowed myself a small, cold smile. "I always liked the name," I said softly. "It speaks of rising from the ashes." The full, world-altering weight of what I was saying finally crashed down on her, and the look on her face was one of pure, unadulterated horror. My children just stood there, frozen, as their entire reality tilted on its axis. The silence that followed my declaration was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating thing, broken only by the distant sound of city traffic far below. The air in the expensive boardroom, once vibrating with triumph, was now thick with shock and disbelief. Isabel gaped at me, her mouth opening and closing silently like a fish pulled from water. The smug, powerful executive was gone, replaced by a confused, sputtering woman. "You?" she finally managed, the word a choked whisper. "That's impossible. You don't have that kind of money. I left you with nothing." "You left me with exactly what I needed," I replied, my voice even and devoid of emotion. "You left me with a reason to go back to work." Leo and Jessica were statues. Their faces were blank slates, their minds furiously trying to reconcile the image of their father, the tired, broke cashier they had pitied and manipulated, with the phantom power player who had just brought their mother's empire to a screeching halt. The cognitive dissonance was so profound, it left them speechless. They had walked in here for a victory lap, and instead had stumbled into their own funeral. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. The power of the moment was in its quiet, undeniable finality. My revenge wasn't loud and explosive. It was a silent, strategic demolition. They weren't just outplayed. They had been operating on a completely different and inferior chessboard from the very beginning. My gaze shifted to my children. "You were right," I said to them. And they both flinched. This deal was about securing the family's future. I just have a very different idea of what that future looks like. Isabel finally found her voice, a roar of pure, impotent rage. "You can't do this! I'll sue you! I'll destroy you!" Her own lawyer put a hand on her arm. "Isabel, stop," he said quietly. "Based on this email, they hold the debt. They control the covenants. It's all perfectly legal. There's nothing to sue for." The finality of those words broke her. Isabel sank into her chair, the fight draining out of her, leaving behind the hollow shell of a defeated woman. She looked at me, and for the first time since our divorce, she saw me. Not the discarded husband or the embarrassing father, but the ghost. And she
was terrified. I watched them crumble, not with glee, but with the detached, weary satisfaction of a strategist seeing a long and difficult campaign come to its inevitable conclusion. My gaze was steady. I had their attention now. The real work was about to begin. The corporate world moves at the speed of information. Within 24 hours, the news of the failed Apex acquisition and the subsequent restructuring of Roadstar Gas & Go was the talk of the industry. The narrative, carefully crafted by Julian's team, was simple. The company had been saved from a predatory private equity firm by a new private philanthropic ownership group, Phoenix Legacy Group. The first official memo sent out under my new authority was not about cost-cutting or executive shakeups. It was addressed to every single station-level employee in the Roadstar franchise, from cashiers to janitors. It announced 3 things, effective immediately. First, a 20% across-the-board pay raise for all hourly employees. Second, a new comprehensive healthcare and dental plan, fully subsidized by the company. And third, the establishment of the Roadstar Futures Scholarship Fund, a multi-million-dollar endowment created to provide full college tuition for the children of any employee with over 2 years of service. It was signed simply, Elias, owner. The message was clear. My power would not be used to punish, but to build. This wasn't a cruel, vindictive takeover. It was a course correction. It was my way of showing that the people who actually did the work, the ones who wore the cheap polyester vests and dealt with the public day in and day out, were now the priority. It was revenge with a heart. But the memo had a second, less publicized section. It detailed the creation of a new, mandatory executive apprenticeship program designed to give promising candidates a ground-up education in business operations. It was an unpaid, 6-month trial program that involved rotating through the least desirable jobs in the company: night shift sanitation, cooler stocking, and bathroom maintenance. There were only 2 inaugural recruits, whose participation was a non-negotiable condition of their family's ongoing financial review. Their names were Leo and Jessica. The revenge wasn't just about taking away their mother's company and their unearned wealth. It was about taking away their ignorance. I was going to give them the education their mother never had, the education of humility, hard work, and consequences. They were about to learn, firsthand, what it felt like to be on the other side of the counter. I summoned them not to a gleaming boardroom downtown, but to the gas station. My gas station. I had them meet me in the cramped windowless back office, the same one Frank used to steal from. The air smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. It was a fitting place for their new beginning. They walked in, their faces pale and drawn, their expensive clothes looking absurdly out of place. They had the look of people who had been awake for 48 hours, trying to make sense of a world that no longer obeyed any of the rules they knew. I didn't stand up. I sat behind the cheap metal desk and gestured to the 2 folding chairs opposite me. They sat down stiffly. On the desk, between us, were 2 neatly folded polyester vests. They were identical to the one I used to wear, complete with the cheerful Roadstar Gas & Go logo. "Your mother's personal and corporate accounts have been frozen," I began, my voice calm and factual. "Pending a full forensic audit of her business practices at Apex Holdings. I suspect we'll find a great deal of creative accounting." This wasn't a guess, it was a certainty. "As such, all your allowances and credit cards have been canceled. The trust funds your grandfather set up, which I now administer, are suspended indefinitely. The convertible and the SUV are being repossessed this afternoon. As of this moment, you have no income." I paused,
letting the full weight of their new reality settle upon them. Jessica stared at the vests on the desk as if they were venomous snakes. Leo just stared at the floor, his jaw tight. "This," I said, pushing the vests toward them, "is your income now. This is your job. The executive apprenticeship program. You'll work 40 hours a week. You'll be paid minimum wage. You will be subject to the same rules as every other employee. Leo, your shift starts tonight at 11. You're on sanitation and waste disposal. Jessica, you start tomorrow at 6 a.m. You'll be stocking the coolers and cleaning the bathrooms." Jessica finally looked up, her eyes wide with disbelief and horror. "You can't be serious. Dad, please." "I am not your father here," I stated, my voice leaving no room for argument. "Here, I am the owner. You will address me as such, or as sir. This is not a discussion, it is not a negotiation. It is the new reality. Clock in on time, or you're fired." The silence that followed was thick with their shattered entitlement. They were no longer the privileged children of a corporate titan. They were my employees, and their education was about to begin. The first few weeks were a silent, brutal war. Leo and Jessica moved through their shifts like sullen ghosts, their faces set in masks of resentful fury. Their friends, of course, found out. They would drive through the station late at night, laying on the horn and shouting insults as Leo hauled overflowing trash bags to the dumpster. They would come in during the day to buy a drink, taking pictures of Jessica on their phones as she mopped up a soda spill in aisle 3. It was a public and profound humiliation, a mirror image of the one they had inflicted on me. And just as I had, they endured it in silence. They had to. They were broke, homeless. I had arranged for them to live in a small, run-down apartment nearby, the rent for which was deducted directly from their paychecks. And utterly powerless. For the first time in their lives, they needed a job they despised. I didn't speak to them outside of giving work-related instructions. I managed the franchise from that same small office, watching them on the security cameras. I watched them learn, through sheer painful repetition, the exhausting reality of manual labor. I saw Leo's hands, once soft and manicured, become red and calloused. I saw the perpetual exhaustion in Jessica's eyes. But I started to see other things too. Small, almost imperceptible cracks were forming in their armor of entitlement. One rainy night, I saw Leo on the cameras, struggling with a broken pump in the pouring rain. An elderly man's car had run out of gas just short of the station. After he fixed the pump, I watched him fill a can with gas, walk out into the storm, and help the man get his car started. He refused the money the man tried to give him. A week later, a frantic mother came into the store with a screaming toddler. Jessica, who was stocking yogurt, saw the scene. She disappeared into the back and returned with a free slushie, calming the child down and giving the mother a moment of peace. These weren't grand gestures. They were small, quiet acts of decency, performed when they thought no one of importance was watching. One evening, as I was leaving late, I saw them sitting together on the curb behind the station, sharing a hot dog from the roller grill. They weren't fighting. They weren't complaining. They were just two people, exhausted from a long day's work, sharing a simple meal in silence. For the first time in a long, long time, they looked less like the monsters of my memory and more like my children.
At the end of their second week, I called them into the back office. They came in smelling of bleach and fatigue and stood before the desk like errant school children. I didn't ask them to sit. I simply took 2 envelopes out of the desk drawer and handed one to each of them. Their first paychecks. Leo opened his first. He stared at the small, pathetic number on the paper for a long time, his face unreadable. Jessica opened hers, and her shoulders slumped. The amount, after taxes and their rent had been deducted, was barely enough to cover groceries. She looked from the check to me, and I saw her eyes well up with tears. But they weren't tears of anger or resentment. They were tears of pure, dawning comprehension. "This is really hard," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Yes," I said softly, "it is." I let the weight of that simple truth settle in the room. I didn't offer them a way out. I didn't promise them their old lives back. I didn't give them a hug. But I did something else. I reached back into the drawer and pulled out a third, thicker envelope. I handed it to Jessica. Her brow furrowed in confusion as she opened it. Inside were not legal documents or another paycheck, but two pristine, glossy brochures. They were applications for the Roadstar Futures Scholarship Fund. "The old way is over," I told them both, my voice firm, but for the first time, not unkind. That life, the one you had, was a fantasy built on someone else's money. It was never real. "This," I said, gesturing to the office, to the gas station beyond the door, "is real." I looked them both in the eye, seeing not the arrogant children from the black convertible, but two young adults standing at a terrifying and absolute crossroads. This is your chance to build something of your own, something real. You can either be the kids who laughed at their father working at a gas station, or you can be the people who learned the value of $1 and earned their own future, starting right here. The choice, for the first time in your lives, is entirely yours. My revenge was complete. Not because I had taken everything from them, but because I had given them the one thing they never had, a chance to become someone worthy of their own name. I had not destroyed them. I had given them a foundation, a hard, unforgiving, concrete foundation. And now it was up to them to build.